There are two types of students in the world. On the one hand, there's student A. Student A is the grinder who's been studying for months without seeing any results. Student A is taking practice test after practice test. They're reviewing every single concept over and over again, and they're spending hours each day trying to improve, but they end up exhausted, stressed out, and not seeing any good results. Then, on the other hand, you have student B, who's the strategist with a focused and efficient plan. Student B knows exactly what to work on, knows exactly how to work on it. They don't waste time on stuff they've already mastered, and they end up being calm, confident, and they end up getting great results on their test. I personally helped thousands of students go from being student A over here to becoming student B and improving their test scores using my test hacking system. And today, I'm going to show you how you can study less and still get higher test scores. But first, let me give you some context on why I'm qualified to tell you this. So I've been obsessed with both studying and test taking for years now. I scored a perfect 36 myself on the ACT over a dozen times now. I went to the University of Chicago, and I'm not just saying this to flex. I'm saying this to show you that I personally had to learn how to work efficiently because I didn't have unlimited time. I was playing varsity baseball at U Chicago. I had an incredibly busy schedule, and I had to keep up my grades and my test scores while also being constrained on time pretty significantly. So over the years, I've distilled it down to 4 key principles that now anybody can use to improve their test scores. So principle number 1 is that you need to find your specific weaknesses. Now, what I see out there a lot is most students try to study everything equally, regardless of what's actually going to move the needle the most for their test score. For example, we just had a student who recently came into our ACT coaching program, and he started out with a 24 on the math section. So of course, we gave this student a diagnostic test, and the diagnostic test showed that he was missing 80% of the more difficult questions that come at the end of the math section, but he was also missing 40% of the easier questions that come at the beginning of the test. This student felt like he was struggling on the harder questions at the end of the test. When he was taking the diagnostic, he felt uncomfortable on those specific questions. He naturally wanted to focus on those questions first. And this is a super common thing that I see all students out there want to do. But this is not the right way to go about things. You don't just create a study plan based on your feelings. And the reason why we took a little bit of a different approach with this student, we didn't work on those difficult questions first, even though he was missing 80% of them, is because he had lower hanging fruit in those easier types of questions. It's much easier to go from getting 60% of those easy questions correct to something like 90% and getting that extra 30 percentage points right there than it is to go from getting 20% of the more difficult questions correct to getting 50% of the more difficult questions correct. So if you're looking at improving your score by 30 percentage points in one area, you want to look at where it's easiest to get those 30 extra percentage points. And for him, and for most students, that's on like the easier questions on the math section where you just have a lot of low-hanging fruit because you're making obvious little mistakes that can be fixed very easily. When we mastered those easier questions and we spent a couple weeks just working on those, it actually made it so that he was working through those questions a lot quicker and a lot more muscle memory had built up. By the time he got to the more difficult questions at the end of the test, he actually had a lot more time to think through those problems and solve them accurately. So just through that alone, he probably gained an extra 5 or 10 percentage points, going from like 20% to 25 or 30%. And on top of that, by improving his fundamentals in order to get his easier questions up to 90%, also helped out a little bit with those more difficult questions. So even though the concepts weren't the exact things that we were working on for those difficult questions, by the time this student was up to 90% on the easier questions, he had also just naturally improved from 20% up to about 40% of those more difficult questions from both the timing and the fundamentals being rebuilt. And so ultimately, we ended up improving his math results very significantly in just a couple weeks worth of time, which would not have been the case if we had just focused on those more difficult questions that he wanted to work on at first because he wanted to go with his feelings. And so the actual sequence that we took this student through was we spent about 1 or 2 weeks on just working on those easy level questions at the beginning. Then we spent about 1 week or so, maybe even a little bit less than a week, working on the medium level difficulty questions. And then after that, we actually never worked on the difficult questions at the end of the test at all. We actually moved on to the English section entirely. And the reason we did this is because at this point in time, we realized we had already taken his math score up from 24 to about the 30 range. And we saw that he had a lot more low-hanging fruit over in the English section. So the key takeaway here is that you want to focus your time and effort on what actually moves the needle the most, not just what feels the most uncomfortable to you. And a couple action steps that you can take here so you know you're following principle number 1 the best way possible. You need to start out by taking a diagnostic test. And when you're taking this diagnostic test, it's very important to follow a couple key rules. So you need to make sure that whatever test it is that you're prepping for, this diagnostic is as realistic to the real test conditions as possible. You need to make sure that you're simulating the test conditions as much as you possibly can. And then action step number 2, you need to go look at that diagnostic test and categorize each type of question that you're missing as specific of a question type as possible. For an ACT example, you wouldn't just want to say, I'm bad at math, I need to study math. You want to break it down a lot more than that. And this leads directly into step number 3, which is you need to prioritize all the different things you need to study and pick which one is the most important and then rank the rest of them after that. So for example, high priority question types would be ones that show up the most often on the test and that you miss the most frequently. On the other hand, the lowest priority question types would be ones where you get them right every single time you see them and they don't show up that often. So you need to balance both how good you are at answering those specific problems and how often they show up. So figure out what your highest priority types of questions are and start there, because that's the highest leverage thing you can do for improving your score. Now, quick mention, this is all stuff that we do for our students specifically in our ACT coaching program. So if you have a student or you are a student who's looking to get a better ACT score, there should be a quick link in the description down below where you can check out some of our details, get on a free ACT game plan meeting, and we can help you put together a good plan, show you what it would look like for you to work with us specifically. And then if you decide to join our coaching program, we'll give you all of this stuff, all the prioritization, and basically every single thing that you could possibly need in order to master the ACT. But now once you know what you need to focus on, the next step is understanding that you're not actually trying to solve 1,000 different problems all at once. And that leads to principle number 2, which is that you need to learn the specific patterns of the test you're studying for. So a lot of students think that every single question that shows up on a standardized test is completely unique and it's something that you've never seen before. But the thing is, standardized tests ask the same types of questions again and again, with maybe slightly different wording or slightly different packaging from what you might expect. Now, I didn't personally realize this until I had wasted over 100 hours of my own time studying for the ACT back in high school myself. And I started out with an ACT score of a 31. I spent 100 hours studying, and because I didn't realize this, after I spent that 100 hours studying, I was still at a 31. I had taken over a dozen full-length practice ACTs, but as I was taking those, I got fully lost in the details. It wasn't until I took a huge step back and looked at my mistakes across all of the dozen practice tests that I had taken that I saw that I kept missing the same types of long, super drawn out word problems, specifically on the math section. And once I looked at that bigger picture across all of the different mistakes that I was making across all tests, that was when I saw that this specific type of question showed up 7 or 8 times every single math test. And I was missing them almost every single time. Now, the reason why this is so important is because once you realize that there are patterns to the test and you recognize what types of questions you're missing, you can solve these questions automatically. It's not just about memorizing solutions to thousands of different questions. It's about recognizing, oh, this is that type of question. This is that long drawn out word problem. And then you should be able to apply a framework that you have to solving that type of question. So a couple action steps that you can take for pattern recognition here is first, just recognize that there are only so many question types that are showing up on whatever test it is that you're taking. And what you can do in order to do this is look at a couple different practice tests that you have and just see, what are the similarities between different questions? And then you want to take those similar questions and just group them together into your own category or your own bucket of questions. And then action step number 2 is you want to learn the most efficient way to solve each one of those specific buckets that you've now created. So once you recognize that there is a pattern, figure out what the best approach is to that specific type of problem. For example, on those long drawn out word problems, I found that I personally needed to just break up those questions into one piece at a time and then turn anything that showed up that was abstract in the question into something concrete that I could actually solve and follow through with. Now, I don't have time to go into full detail about how this process works, but I do have a number of different videos on the channel that go into this specific process. You can check out a full breakdown for how to do this specifically. And then action step number 3 is that you want to practice this pattern recognition until it becomes automatic, until it becomes completely muscle memory and you don't have to think twice about answering a specific question. Obviously, you can't get to the answer by only reading the first half of the question, but you know kind of what you're going to do and you already have a plan in place. And this is how you can save huge amounts of time and improve your accuracy at the same time. However, just recognizing the patterns and recognizing the question types isn't enough to actually improve your score. You need to actually create practice drills for you to improve on those question types. That brings me to principle number 3, which is drill one thing at a time specifically. So I see a lot of students who spread themselves super thin and they try to study everything at once. They try to fix all their mistakes at the same time, and they never actually make any progress on any one thing. Now, if you look at any sports practice, that's not how they do this. In baseball, we didn't just go scrimmage every day. We didn't do a full 9-inning scrimmage anytime we wanted to get better. What we actually did was we broke things out into specific drills to improve one thing at a time. And it's the same thing like if you're a football quarterback, you may practice doing just like taking the snap and then doing your drop back footwork so that your footwork gets better. The point here is that you want to master one specific skill at a time without spreading yourself thin across everything that you're trying to improve. And that's because doing focused drills actually creates the muscle memory that makes things second nature to you. So obviously when we bring this to the test preparation world, all the way over from the sports world to test prep, the same principle applies when you're studying. You don't just take full practice tests and full practice exams every single day. What you do is you isolate that one question type and you create a drill to improve on that specific question type. So you want to create some sort of a drill for yourself, and this may be constraining yourself on time if you're working on a timing thing. It may be limiting yourself to not using your calculator on certain things on the math section so you can build muscle memory the right way. It might be a million different things, but you want to identify the best way you can actually improve on those specific types of questions and just do that drill over and over again until it becomes muscle memory. And this makes it so that when you recognize that question type, when you take principle number 2 and you now have that pattern recognition, principle number 3 makes it so that you can actually solve that question efficiently and you know exactly what you're doing in the most efficient way possible. So a couple action steps that you can take for applying principle number 3. First off, you want to start with your number 1 specific weakness. So obviously back in principle number 1, you've identified all your weaknesses and then you've categorized them as high priority, low priority. You want to pick that highest leverage one and then create specific drills for improving on whatever question type that is. And then action step number 2 would be to create a couple different focused specific drills that you think may improve your ability to solve those specific types of questions. And specifically in our coaching program, we may have students check out a short explainer video on what we think is the best way to solve a specific type of question. And then we may give that student, a worksheet that takes 20 or 30 minutes where they're literally only doing that one question type and they're doing that one drill again and again and again. And then action step number 3, the key is that you don't move on from that one question or that one drill or the couple drills that you're using for, one specific type of question until you've achieved mastery on that one specific question. And basically you just rinse and repeat this process until you've mastered everything. But now here's where most students mess up the timeline. And that's what brings me to principle number 4, which is short sprints. So dragging out test prep for 6 months or more leads to burnout and actually worse results than someone who does things for a shorter period of time. So I've personally seen this so many times where students come to us after working with tutors or working in other long drawn out programs because those tutors and those programs are actually incentivized to hold you back. For example, last year we worked with a student named Camden who came to our program as a senior because during her junior year, she had worked with a tutoring company, some sort of tutoring program that put together a year-long program that lasted her entire junior year.
Do it as soon as you're a sophomore. Do it now. Like start sophomore year so you can just have a great junior year. Don't even have to worry about it. Just start early and work hard in that little bit of time. I'm trying to think of like the right word. A little bit of time with hard work is worth it more than like a long period of time with little work.
Yeah, so short sprint versus marathon.
Yes, short sprint versus marathon. And you'd rather just sprint it.
Definitely, 100%.
Yeah, so start now and then you'd rather just sprint and get it all done than drag it on. So
Camden came to us as a senior because during her junior year, she had worked with a tutoring company and they had put together what I think is just like an absolutely awful tutoring program for her. They had her doing 1 or 2 tutoring sessions every single week for the entire year. It was like if she had a personal trainer that was just telling her to run with no definition of when she would stop. So obviously this led to Camden having a really tough time being able to put any focused amount of energy into her work. And she started that program at the beginning of her junior year at a 24 on the ACT. And by the end of that program, after her junior year, again, a full year of tutoring, she only had a 25. So she moved from a 24 to a 25 after, I think it was like 11 or 12 months of tutoring. So she came to us beginning of her senior year with a 25. And we showed her a much better way of doing things, which is the short sprints method. So normal tutoring companies charge more the longer that a process drags on. But the reason why sprints work much better is because it gives you that finish line that's not that far in the future. And that's what prevents burnout and creates some sort of sense of urgency at the same time. And that's why we've just seen from our company, after working with thousands of students, that 4 to 6 week window is kind of that sweet spot between, not having enough time to improve your score and dragging things out for so long that the student gets burnt out and can't actually improve. So for your action steps here, step number 1, pick your test date and count backwards by 4 to 6 weeks. So just look at all of the available test dates that are the options for you. Count backwards 4 to 6 weeks from that date, and that's when you start your sprint. Action step number 2, and this is what we do for students in our ACT program, is create a 1 hour per day study plan. We found that 1 hour per day is, again, it's in that perfect sweet spot range of, something that's manageable to keep up for 4 to 6 weeks. And it's also plenty of time to actually improve on what it is that you're doing. What you want to do is create specific checklist items on that to-do list every single day. So it might be 20 minutes of drilling coordinate plane geometry questions, and then 30 minutes of drilling subject-verb agreement questions, and then 10 minutes of reviewing your mistakes from yesterday. Basically, you just want to have clear, actionable items that you can follow every single day so that you don't have to think about what it is that you're doing. That's one of the big things that students in our program, they love about it. They don't even really recognize the value of it before joining our program, but during and after our program, they're like, oh my gosh, it was so much easier to actually do the work when I knew exactly what it was that I was doing. And I had an actual checklist of things given to me by somebody else. So that action step number 2 is an incredibly important one. But action step number 3 is you need to commit to that finish line. So around 3 or 4 weeks in, it might get a little bit difficult. You might see your motivation drop a little bit. You might get tired. You might want to quit. But this is where you just look up for that light at the end of the tunnel, and you see that it's not that far away from you. It's only 1 or 2 weeks away at this point. So those are the 4 principles of the test hacking system. In our coaching program, it's the ACT hacking system. You can really apply this to any specific standardized test that you're looking at, and really any test that you're thinking about taking at all, regardless of whether it's a standardized test or a college test. So just a quick summary of those 4 principles. The first one is to find your weaknesses and prioritize the highest leverage ones possible. The second is to learn the patterns so you're not starting from scratch every single time you see a brand new question. And then third, you want to drill things one at a time until you build that muscle memory and solving the problems correctly becomes automatic. And then fourth, you just want to sprint for a short period of time with a clear finish line in front of you. So if you want to see this process in action specifically for the ACT, check out the video right here. It should be right on the screen right here on how to master the ACT in 2025. I break down the entire process from start all the way to finish on the ACT. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.